I'll see you guys in the dark.
For reference, I was a 19-year-old female at the time. Still female, of course, just a little older. I love camping. Anytime my friends and I come home from college, we would load up our cooler with beer, grab some gear, and go screw around outside. Unfortunately, when I was actually at school, none of my sorority sisters or other friends ever wanted to go with me, so I would often suffer withdrawals from camping. One day the weather was way too nice to waste, so I grabbed some of my gear, hopped in a car I borrowed from a buddy, and drove to a spot that was secluded, yet within a safe distance to civilization that I could run and get help if anything happened. Camping also creeps me out sometimes, but that creepy feeling is also somewhat of a plus for me. It's the same reason that people read these stories. It's fun to be scared. So I make a little camp and get a fire going. I hadn't brought all that much to eat, but I was enjoying myself, reading and looking around the area, that sort of thing. I got a feeling I was being watched, and I stopped dead in my tracks. I hear a twig crunch over to my right, then I see a doe bolt from 100 feet or so in front of me. I laughed at myself and went back to the camp with an armful of wood I had gathered. I kept freaking myself out, hearing sounds just outside of the ring of light cast by the fire. I always get inside my head, so I shrugged it off and kept whittling at a stick I had been messing with. Around 1, I decided to go to my tent and snuff out the lantern. I had been slamming beers in the most unladylike fashion and smoking cheap cigars, so I passed out relatively quick. About 2, I started hearing footsteps. They sound pretty light and sort of timid. I think to myself that it's just a deer or other animal. More likely a raccoon, because I had probably left some food out. I'm still on guard though. About 30 minutes of sleeping with one eye open, I hear a rubbing noise, and the tent fabric is being pushed in a bit. I don't know how I didn't crap my sleeping bag, but I just sat there paralyzed with my kabar in my hand. I desperately wanted to thrust my knife through the tent fabric, but I was still holding out hope that it was some of my buddies from a frat joking around with me. And then as suddenly as it had begun, it had all stopped. I was starting to feel slightly more secure, because daylight would be coming in about 2 or 3 hours, but I sure as hell wasn't going to go to sleep. All of a sudden, at about 4 o'clock, I realized I should put my boots on so that if anything happened, I would be ready. After having stayed up and keeping alert a little while longer, my friend's car alarm goes blaring. I freaked out and ran out of the tent. I got about 2 steps before something grabs me around the mouth. I opened my mouth to scream, but instead the person's pinky finger slips between my teeth. I've heard that people can perform superhuman feats when they have huge adrenaline rushes. In my case, I just clamped down and his fingers popped off. He screamed, pulled his hand away with the missing digit falling to the ground. He took off running down the hill I was camping on. I took off right quick in the opposite direction. I must have looked ridiculous to the people whose house I ran to. A little sorority girl in a wife beater, boxers, and steel-toed boots. I also had some blood that had oozed out of my lip, not from the finger, but because I also managed to take a pretty good chunk out of my lip as well. I told them what happened, and they called the police, got me some real clothing, and the man at the house made me whiskey and coke. When the cops got there, they checked it out. The cops went to check it out, and when they came back, it was light out. They brought me back so I can get my friend's car, and what I saw just made me more scared. Right next to the tent was a red gas can. He could also just light me on fire earlier. The finger was also gone, suggested that he had also come back. The kicker is they never caught the guy, so somewhere out there is a man sitting down to dinner, maybe alone, maybe with a wife and a couple of kids, and he's missing his right pinky. This happened about 6 years ago, if I'm remembering the year correctly. It was time for my first ever overnight stay at a summer camp, and I was pretty excited about this. This particular camp had a system where it normally functioned as a day camp, but there was one night each week where kids would stay overnight. I was a socially awkward kid, so I had avoided these overnight stays as much as possible. But this time I decided to be brave, have some fun, and try it myself. Only after did I regret it. So before I explain what happened, I'll briefly give an outline of the camp. It was situated near the shore of an isolated lake, which had very few houses on it. My camping ground decided to take advantage of that and agreed to set up a few feet from the shore, in a small clearing located near a small path. Much of the shoreline was walled off by low-lying thorny underbrush, including the area we were in. So flash forward to nighttime. We set up our tents and sleeping bags. We've eaten our s'mores, and we've set up our sleeping arrangements. I'm in a large tent with 3 other boys, sitting a few feet from the path that ran through the clearing. We whisper amongst ourselves, talking about the best camp activities, crushes, the nicest counselors. You know, usual summer camp stuff. We're just about to say our goodnights when we hear the faint hum of a motor coming from the lake. It's unusual for people to be out late at night on a motorboat on a small, isolated lake, but we initially blow it off as being some person fishing. However, the noise grows louder, and I begin to hear what sounds like drunk people cackling. At first, this is very scary for me. I assume it's just drunk people having some late-night summer fun, and my tent mates agree with me. We try to ignore it, but we started getting nervous when the cackling and chatter had quieted. I hear the engine shut off, and it sounds like the people were quietly disembarking at the camp's fishing dock, which was a few 100 feet away. For a couple of minutes after, I hear total silence. We were terrified. 2 of my tent mates were completely still while the other is fidgeting and shaking. Looking back on it, it wasn't even like this should have been especially scary, but something felt distinctively off about the whole situation. My gut instincts were right. I start hearing slow, methodical footsteps, creeping slowly along the path. It's clear this intruder is intent on being as quiet as possible, but it's easy to hear when someone's walking in a forest full of sticks, mud, and leaves. I'm listening to their steps as they approach our campsite at a painfully low pace when suddenly they stop and grunt. At this point, it's clear that it's 1, a man, 2, not a person who should be here, and 3, someone who is watching us when we set up the campsite. There was no way he could have known where we were without watching us from another part of the lake. The man stands for what feels like an eternity before he begins to move again, but the sound I hear terrifies me. He's moving towards my tent. All my tent mates are laying completely still, mortified but not moving a muscle. Then the man stands for what feels like an eternity before he begins to move again. He approaches our tent, walking right up to it so that we can see the silhouette of his leg outlined by the faint moonlight. He stands for another few seconds, then places his finger on the tent. He drags it across the tent, then begins to walk. The man traces the entire perimeter of the tent with 1 finger. He holds it there for a few seconds after, then grunts again and slowly walks to another tent. My tent mates are terrified, and we're all looking at each other like deer in the headlights. We hear him move from tent to tent and walking around each one, with each trace feeling like it took longer than the last. Finally, he walks slowly back to the path, grunts 1 more time, and walks away quickly in the direction he came from. A few minutes later, I hear the motor on the boat starting up before hearing its sounds fade into the distance. The counselors, who slept through the ordeal, were convinced that we were faking the incident to prank them. Those of us who reported to them were ignored. That is something I hold against the camp to this day. I still don't know what happened with the other person on the boat, where they went, or why one of them even came to our campsite in the first place. But creepy summer camp stalker person, let's not meet. Growing up, every summer in July, my family would get together and camp out for 2 weeks at White Lake State Park. Some of my best childhood memories were made there. Rollerblading, Nerf gun wars, flashlight tag, and water balloon fights with my cousin and neighboring kids in the campground. When I was around my late teen years, my family stopped gathering together to camp out after my grandmother passed away. One of the last years I was there, This was one particular memory that has stuck with me. A little over 10 years ago, I was 16 years old. It was around 10 p.m. at night when I noticed I had a missed call on my cheapy little track phone. My family was sitting around the campfire cooking s'mores and sharing some laughs, so I decided to go off and get some privacy to return the call. I took a long, narrow trail that winds in between other campsites that at the end leads up to the bathroom. I wasn't going to the bathroom, I just wanted to find an empty campsite and sit at a picnic table and make my call. There was plenty of those, since this whole side of the campground where I was headed was vacant. There was no other campers nearby in that area. It was quiet and dark, so I chose a campsite. I sat down at the table. The lights from the distant bathroom from up to the top of the hill behind me were all illuminating my surroundings just a little bit. I called my friend and was carrying on a conversation for around 20 minutes. As I'm sitting there, staring straight ahead, I see a silhouette coming down the road in front of me. The figure is coming towards my direction, where all these empty campsites are. I could see that it was a person. It's not that unusual to see people strolling through the campground for a night walk. The people I see usually have flashlights, though. This person did not. I wasn't creeped out at this point. No really reason to be. I just watched curiously. As the person got closer, I could see a better outline, and that it was a man I was looking at. I also noticed his pace slowed down. I kept my eyes fixated on him as I continued conversating on my cell phone. A minute or two passed, and now he stopped moving. He's just standing there in the road looking straight into the campsite where I'm at. I don't know if he knew I could see him. He was staring straight at me, and I was staring right back at him. He was a little heavy-set and tall. I could also make out that he was wearing a light jacket. I couldn't see much for facial features, but I would guess I was staring at a man in his 30s or 40s. Alarm bells were going off in my head now. My mind had turned to mush at this point, and I'm frozen solid. I was no longer listening to what my friend was saying on the phone. I was in a stare-off with this guy. Then he started to move again. He was tiptoeing towards me, very carefully, like he didn't want to make any noise. He put one foot in front of the other, leaned forward in a slight hunch form. It looked like he was about to charge me. In that moment, I snapped out of my mind-frozen state and leaped off the picnic table, started running through the campsite back towards the trail. I could hear him trampling behind me, leaves scuffling, heavy yet fast footsteps. Footsteps were getting louder and closer. I made it back to that narrow trail. Once he got close to where I was, I heard the sound of twigs snapping and an oof noise come from the man, which I can imagine maybe he tripped, or almost tripped, or maybe got face slapped by a tree branch. Most likely, he wasn't familiar with the trail like I was. Whatever the reason was, it caused him to stop chasing me. I didn't stop to look back. I just kept running and running until I made it back to my family's campsite. When I got back, they were still sharing laughs and smile by the campfire. I broke down crying and I was trembling. I explained what had just happened to me. My aunt spoke up and said, "Oh geez, he probably thought he knew you and was coming to give you a good scare as a joke." She just dismissed me. My cousin chimed in and said, "Yeah, he probably stopped running after he realized that he didn't actually know you. He probably feels dumb now." They all chuckle about it and change the subject. I think I was dismissed because no one wanted the good vibes of the night to be ruined, and the fact that I'm just a socially awkward person in general. I'm very cautious and shy. For that time being, I just let them convince me that I was just overreacting and overthinking. But here I am years later, looking back and shaking my head over all of this. I wish I was taken seriously, but other than that one thing happening, it was still a great trip. It was time well spent with my family. My experience makes me think twice about going for a walk by myself anywhere. I carry pepper spray and a mini keychain alarm on me now. So, Mr. Campground Chaser, let's not meet again. Last summer, my boyfriend and I went camping in a nature preserve in Pennsylvania. I can't remember the name of the place. It was pretty primitive camping. No cell service, and we saw 2 other people there in the entire place. It was huge, so it was pretty empty. My boyfriend pretty much immediately said these 2 people seemed off to him right away. I don't know if they had anything to do with what happened that night, but I'll describe them anyway. The first person was a woman who had her truck parked off the trail and the hood open. I don't really notice these type of things, but my boyfriend said it looked to him like they were waiting for someone to pull them off the side and offer to help with their truck. Normally my boyfriend is the type to at least offer to call someone, but he said she skeeved him out enough he didn't even want to draw her attention more than what's necessary. The next person we saw drove by several times while we were setting up. He just kept driving by slowly and looking at us. I didn't even notice, though, until my boyfriend pointed out that he had already gone and done that twice. Whether these 2 people had anything sinister going on or not, the real story has to do with what woke us up at around 3 a.m. It was incredibly loud and sudden. I couldn't describe it or even compare it to anything, but my boyfriend said it sounded to him similar to a chain gun revving up, or someone using some large tool to scrape gravel. My boyfriend jumped up and looked out the little window of the tent. The sound happened again and again, and it was getting noticeably closer each time. I was about to pee myself, but my boyfriend told me it was probably miles off. I didn't notice this because loud noises can be heard from miles off, right? Well, later my boyfriend told me that because he didn't want to scare me, it really sounded like it was coming right down the little dirt road. At one point, he said he suspected it was right in front of our campsite. The only reason he didn't tell me to get out and dart for the car was because he was afraid it would be someone trying to scare us out of the tent for some dreadful reason. He whispered for me to go back to sleep. However, I did not, because every little sound I heard outside sounded like someone sneaking up to the tent. Eventually, my boyfriend told me to get out and help him pack up. It was maybe 20 minutes after the sound stopped. He held our only weapon, a machete, in front of him. It was a full moon, or close to it, so we didn't need a light at all. While we were packing quickly, I noticed an empty beer can close to our dead campfire. It wasn't there when we went to sleep at 10 p.m., and neither of us even brought any beer. Thankfully, we got out of there, and for the rest of that trip, we either camped in areas well populated by other campers, or we got a hotel room. So whoever or whatever that was, let's not meet.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.